The sky was on fire the night I was born, and that made a lot of people very, very happy. You see, it was December 31st, 1997, New Year's Eve. My mother had done her best to keep me on layaway inside of her, but try as she might, even though her dream of one day having a New Year's Day baby was incredibly strong, my ever-developing desire to always find the spotlight at any given moment in time was a little bit stronger. Pair that up with the fact that my Uncle Sam, who was the main doctor in charge of my delivery, informed my mom that a traditional birth would not be possible, that a C-section would need to be happening as immediately as possible if we were to both survive this ordeal. So, my mom buried her ego in that moment, opened herself up to new possibilities, maybe a little bit too literally, because she made that room her own via the loudest cesarean signatures ever recorded in South Texas. But before anyone could cut out the semi-symbolic middleman from the equation, this guy, well, each of the doctors that were in attendance that day began taking mighty hefty swigs of champagne that was conveniently located in the delivery room thanks to the ongoing festivities. Doctor after PhD just pre-gaming with their fingers crossed for a successful newborn and New Year arrival. All while my mom relayed to me how her organs became mine in an instant, how the invention of silence got stuck between her wisdom teeth on the way out, how cloaked and sterilized figures began evicting me from her very flesh, and how she herself could sense a shift in room temperature through the love-shaped hole now present in her torso. It was as if an elephant had sat upon my chest and began to do a circus routine, she happily tells me whenever reminiscing about that night. And with a crescendo of holy smokes surrounding the entire building's perimeter, I made my debut. The doctor said it took a while for me to register that crying was a thing that I can do because of the audible stampede of fireworks coming out on side. So, I always thought that was really cool information to know later on, that my very first words were confused with unintelligible farewells for an entire calendar year I had barely gotten to know for a moment. Growing up, I lived in a 1-mile radius of 5 different fireworks stands, each of them a cutthroat peddler of boomsticks and the prettiest prepackaged artillery fire rejected from the armed forces, who could not, for the life of them, shove down a tank or duct tape to a mortar. And these businesses were an oasis for someone like me, a still developing prepubescent pyromaniac. Guilty. And these places had awesome items for sale with equally awesome names like Ethereal Neon Strike, Trojan Ascension, Gumball Confetti Party. Basically, the kind of stuff that only real men would get their hands on. And competition was tense, like really tense. Everyone wanted to blow up the loudest or the brightest or with as many missing accidental fingers as possible for better parking. But in a weird way, it seemed every explosion was an opportunity to plant a flag, and all of us bleeding hearts for our own personal reasons, making the sky one vast open road, and all of us open wounds waiting to ascend upon it in a blaze of glory. On my birthday, it was a regular occasion for the foundation of my house to literally be shaking as a result of all the ongoing celebratory activities outside. Especially because we had several neighbors that were very engaged. On one side were our neighbors Bill and Barbara Baker, these sort of mechanical connoisseur types who would use the skeletal remains of washing machines to test whether or not fireworks were good or past their expiration date. I'm talking about chucking jerry-rigged piles of Roman candles straight into the drum, followed by match sets completely ablaze. On a separate and unrelated note, if anyone is missing or has any hound dogs that I haven't seen in a while, sorry. On the other end of the property were our more affluent neighbors from Mexico City, the Eswadas, who would attach Madison Square Garden-sized pyrotechnics to the windshield wipers of their leopard decal-wrapped Range Rovers. Yeah, And they would chase these sparks heading up into the air with, and I kid you not, live rounds of ammunition from their turquoise-encrusted handguns and rifles. Which is Spanish for, thank God we're rich. You know, I think humanity has always been weird when it comes to the magic of fire. I think it's actually quite the most human thing ever. Declaring the slow ambiance of night not really good enough, firing literal sunsets at it in celebration of ourselves. My mom herself was never really a big fan of the whole firework thing, which made my birthday a painful and annual irony in a lot of ways, especially because I was completely enamored with them. But most of the time, she'd be inside the house, hiding behind these little rectangular windows in the utility room, overlooking me in the backyard, bicycle-kicking cherry bombs that she could have sworn were atom bombs in disguise. Until one night, on my 11th New Year's Eve, my mom decided to do something she had never done ever, willingly. She decided to join me for firecrackers. And I knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so I busted out the Zip Zaps. Now, for those of you who don't know, Zip Zaps are sort of an introductory level type firework. When you light them on the ground, they spin in a neon circle, shoot upwards, and possibly to the side, depending on how exactly you lit them on the floor. But that night, it would be a middle-aged woman who would be radicalized as she observed her young son go up to a caterpillar nugget size of gunpowder on the floor, set it ablaze, her fingers clenched with tension, her heart a NASCAR race with anxiety, beating with such intense vigor, you would have assumed she had just seen a picture of Richard Gere in his prime, shirtless. And before the firecracker had a chance to even start emitting sparks, my mom did something that to this day she denies ever happened. She grew a strong penchant, fast, for human shielding loved ones in the face of danger. By which, of course, I mean she was literally baton twirling me in the face of that slow-forming fire, all while screaming Bloody Marys as if she was some kind of verbal fire extinguisher. And before I had a chance to react to any of this, I began to make my landing, face first in a ring light of heat, a warm tornado of chaos, a solar flare facial mask, until all of a sudden, nothing. Darkness. It was like that for a moment, and then I woke up, and I could sense that things were different. It was December 31st, 2007. Uncle Sam had come by the property to assess the situation, wearing a very form-fitting bikini top with a noisemaker just slightly hanging out the corner of his mouth. I knew instantly I could trust this man. As he looked me over, he said I'd make a full recovery. I would simply need to keep my upper lip gauzed up for a couple weeks, changing it here and there. But what I did not know was that a full recovery would entitle me to an entire decade and a half of not being able to ever grow facial hair. Yes, this right here is new. How new? Yesterday. And the upper portion of my lip, right smack dab in the center, has not quite figured out how to connect either ends, making my upper lip look like two crime scenes that just went cold right before they could solve anything. But on top of that, the worst tragedy of that night was the fact that from that day on, my mom would call me handsome with tears in her eyes. And besides the pain of a firework to the face, that right there is torture. So I made it a point that on my birthday, I would jump on the landmine that would get caught in my mom's throat when she looked at me. I would hold her hands until the guilt melted out of her bones, hands that once flawlessly protected me in a car crash, hands that once navigated me through a life that could have easily snuffed out my flame, in hands that once put money on me to come out on top in a grudge match between a birthday boy and a man-made supernova. Thank you.